Hello again. We are on the final lap of our values journey with core action value number 12, leadership. If you have really taken to heart the things we've been talking about in this course on the first 11 core action values, really putting effort into the cornerstones and doing the actions that we've recommended, you are becoming the kind of person that other people look up to. You're becoming the kind of person who influences other people through your example, through your attitude, through your behavior. They're seeing the changes you make, and they're being inspired to try to make some of those changes themselves. That is the best definition I know of a leader. It is somebody who influences other people to be their best and inspires them to do the hard work necessary to be that best self. That's what a leader is. And it doesn't matter if you're a manager or not. Management is a job description. Your boss can make you a manager by giving you a title and a new name tag and a new job description and hopefully a pay raise. Leadership is a life decision. And some of the best leaders, some of the strongest leaders in many organizations and many communities don't have a job title. Nobody told Martin Luther King to take on the fight that he took on. Nobody told Candy Lightner to start Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Nobody told Wendy Kopp to start Teach for America or Millard Fuller to start Habitat for Humanity. These are people who saw a need, saw an opportunity, figured out how they could make a difference, and through their action, their behavior, their commitment, they became leaders. They influenced us in how we think. They inspired us to join them. Management is a job description. Leadership is a life decision. I have another favorite definition of leadership. It's Joel Barker's definition. And he said, a leader is somebody who takes you to a place you didn't know you wanted to go. And that implies two things, doesn't it? One, it implies the vision of that place. One of our core action values, vision. It implies creating a vision, a dream of a world or a corner of the world that is somehow better than what it is now. And the second thing it implies is inspiring people to follow, to do the work, to make the sacrifices, to make the commitment, to do the work to make the world or your corner of the world a little better. That's what leaders do. They influence other people, they inspire other people, they take us to a place that we didn't know we wanted to go. Back in the 1970s and before, we didn't know we wanted to have a world that was smoke-free. Most of us didn't know that, but C. Everett Koop did. When he said in 1984, he said, we're going to have a smoke-free society, everybody wondered what he was smoking. And today we're virtually there. Think of any great achievement. As I said when we were talking about perseverance, every great accomplishment was once the impossible dream of a dreamer who refused to quit. And through their determination, through their commitment, they influenced us, they inspired us, and with their leadership and our work, we changed the world. So let's look at the cornerstones of leadership. And it begins with expectations. Isn't that what leaders do? They help us raise our expectations of ourselves and of each other. And I've mentioned before that I think one of the greatest textbooks on leadership actually wasn't a textbook on leadership at all. It was a wonderful novel, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, and the prequel to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. And in the book The Hobbit, there's this beautiful scene where these dwarves, led by Thorin, who's the king of the dwarves, have had their treasure stolen by a fire-breathing dragon. And he's buried all this treasure at the bottom of a mountain, and they want to get it back. And they need a burglar to sneak into the cave and tell them where the fire-breathing dragon is. Did I mention this is fiction? So they need a burglar to go in and tell them where the dragon is. And Gandalf the wizard, who's the hero of the book, one of the heroes of the book, introduces them to Bilbo Baggins the Hobbit. Now, hobbits are about 3 foot high, and they have pot bellies, hairy feet, and they love nothing better than eating, drinking, sleeping, partying, and they want no adventures at all, thank you very much. And Thorin, the king of the dwarves, this mighty warrior, looks down at this little hobbit, and he sniffs and he goes, why? He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. And Gandalf says, there's more to this little hobbit than meets the eye. In fact, he says, there's more to this little hobbit than even he sees in himself. And the rest of the story is the story of how little Bilbo Baggins tries his very hardest to live up to that expectation that Gandalf the leader, Gandalf the wizard, has created at the beginning of the story. And by the end of the story, at the Battle of the Five Armies, who is it that emerges as the real leader? Little Bilbo Baggins the Hobbit, who has lived up to those expectations. That's what leaders do. They help us look in the mirror and see not just who's there now, but who could there be? Who could I be if I were really being my best self? Who could I be if I could walk through the fears that are holding me back? Who could I be if I were really living my values? That's what leaders do. They help us, they inspire us to be the best we can be. Every successful athlete will tell you, I once had a coach who saw more in me than I saw in myself. And then I worked hard to live up to that expectation. And the power of expectations is so incredible. I've mentioned in a previous module Martin Seligman, who wrote the book Learned Optimism. And what he shows through his research that has been duplicated by many others over the years in many different fields is the single best predictor of success is very often simply the expectation of success. That's what leaders do. Nobody wants to follow a leader who thinks it's going to fail. Nobody wants to follow a negative Nelly leader. Nobody wants to follow a leader who is not optimistic but instead is pessimistic. Leaders help us create in our own mind a self-fulfilling prophecy, what I call a memory of the future. Probably the greatest example in the history of American business is the late Steve Jobs. He was famous for creating what was called a reality distortion zone. He would take the most impossible dream, the most impossible goal, and if you got inside the reality distortion zone, you believed it. And when enough people believed it, it became the reality. And they have transformed the computer business, the telecommunications business, the entertainment business with this reality distortion zone that began by setting impossible expectations. The second cornerstone of leadership is example. That's what leaders do. They set an example. And I'll tell you, we work with a lot of organizations. The number one excuse that I hear from people about why I don't want to buy into this or this new program or whatever it is I don't see the leaders walking the talk. I don't see the leaders living the values. They talk about customer service, but I don't see them. That is an obligation of leadership to walk the talk, to set a positive example. When I was in business school, we studied various forms of inventory management. And one of them is called FILO, F-I-L-O, first in, last out. That's a pretty good definition of leadership, of what the best leaders do. They are the first ones to pick up the load, and they are the last ones to set it down. The Israeli army has a doctrine called the Palmach doctrine. And it's essentially first in, last out. It says, in the event of an attack, officers lead the charge. In the event of a retreat, officers are the rear guard. And that does two very important things. One, an officer is much less likely to order a suicide charge if he knows he's going to be leading it. And he's much less likely to order a cowardly retreat if he knows he's the last one out the door. Second good thing it does is it inspires the soldiers following. People are much more inspired by an officer who's out there in front than somebody who's 50 miles back in a mansion calling in orders by radio. And that's a pretty good metaphor for how you become a values-based leader yourself. First in, be the first one to pick up the load, last out. Related to that, and again, I'm drawing on Tolkien's classic literature here, Gandalf was known for always, he would show up where he was most needed but least expected. And that's what great leaders do. In the crisis in the emergency room on a Saturday night, the CEO shows up, cannot do the clinical work, but shows up with a pizza and cookies and coffee for the staff who are feeling overwhelmed. Show up where you're most needed but least expected. That's a lot of what leadership is all about. And there's one example that we see in our work. You know, by now you have become very familiar, I hope, with the Self-Empowerment Pledge. Those 7 simple promises that will not can, might, could, or should, will change your life if you take them to heart. And something we've seen happen in a growing number of organizations is people not just personally taking them to heart, but as groups getting together once a day. And what we have seen, where we have seen this be the most effective and last the longest and stick the best, is where leadership is visibly engaged. The CEO, if he or she is in town, shows up that morning, it only takes 2 or 3 minutes, shows up and participates in reciting that day's promise, and everybody sees. That is setting a positive example. One more thing about leadership as a value. When you become a manager, you have given up certain freedoms. And I think it's a matter of management ethics. When you have accepted the job title, manager, the paycheck that goes with being a manager, the job description, the responsibilities, you have given up the freedom to be what we call a pickle sucker. Always whining and complaining. That's unethical if you're a manager, because you have to set an example and set expectations for other people. You have given up the freedom to second guess. By all means, if a decision's about to be made, you don't agree with it, state your case, marshal your facts, make your argument. Once the decision has been made, if you can't support it fully, then you need to step down from the role. It is unethical for you to go to your people and say, I think this is a really bad idea, but corporate is making us do it. Because what you're doing is setting up the likelihood, you're undermining the work that you're being paid to do, and that's not ethical. That is not living the values of being an effective leader. You've given up that freedom. The third cornerstone of leadership is encouragement. Isn't that what the best leaders do? They encourage us, especially when it's hardest to do, in those darkest times when it feels like nothing's working, nothing's going to work. Jim O'Toole wrote a wonderful book on leadership called Leadership A to Z. And it's structured like a dictionary, A through Z. And under C, he has cheerleading. And he says, why do so many leaders forget to put the cheer into leading? Why are they so afraid to let their natural passion and enthusiasm, which you would hope they would have, show in their work? The late C.W. Metcalf called it terminal professionalism. You know, when you're a little kid, you had lots of different ways. You'd smile, you'd laugh. There's been research that shows a baby will laugh like 400 times a day on a good day. When's the last time you laughed 400 times in a day? And just to bring that joy, that cheer back into the leading is such an important thing. And it turns out it is really good business. Think of some of the most successful businesses in America today. Southwest Airlines, but for more than 40 years, the most successful airline in America. They have more parties than every other airline put together. When you come on board, they have rituals, they tell stories, they make you feel special, they make you have fun. Fastest growing steakhouse in America, Texas Roadhouse. What do they do every shift? They have an alley rally, a pep rally. They get everybody into the alley, the space in between the kitchen and the serving area, and they have a pep rally. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, pull into the parking lot of a Les Schwab tire store, the tire technician comes running out to your car. Hi, welcome to Les Schwab. What can we do for you? And these simple ways of encouraging people through the power of ritual is a great form of leadership. And related to that, rituals plus stories. Capture the stories that capture who you are. Capture the stories that reflect your organization's values. Capture the stories that reflect your people acting in a way that reinforces who you are. Hewlett-Packard, Bill and Dave's stories shaped the HP way for many, many years. I worked at HP one summer back in the early 80s, and I heard so many Bill and Dave stories. You know, I heard the story about the time Bill Hewlett came in on a Saturday morning, went to get the tools he needed, the instruments he needed. They're locked up. He got a bolt cutter, cut off the padlock, and put a sign on the cabinet that said, "Never lock this thing again. We trust each other at HP." That story rippled throughout the company. Think of how you can capture the stories that define who you are as an organization. And within a family, what are the stories that define your values within the family? Nordstrom is a department store famous for customer service. They have a policy manual, an employee policy manual, that only has 2 sentences. In every situation, use your best judgment. There will be no further rules. And because people are clear about what the values of the company are and what it values, the customer, they don't need to have a lot of rules. And they reinforce it with stories. Like the time a guy came in to the men's department carrying an armload of tire chains, dumped them on the counter and said, "These don't work, I want my money back." And the guy behind the counter knows Nordstrom does not sell, never has sold tire chains. But because he's so clear about the values of the company, he refunds the guy his money. Just assumes, being a Diana rap, remember when we talked about being a backward paranoid, assume other people are acting in good faith unless it's proven otherwise. Just assuming the guy made an honest mistake, and instead of calling him a liar and a cheat, takes the money out of the cash register and gives it to him. Now in some companies, he'd have gotten in trouble, gotten written up or fired. At Nordstrom, he's a hero, and his story becomes a story that says, this is who we are, this is how we behave. One more thing about encouragement. It is a leadership responsibility to outlaw discouragement. It is a leadership responsibility to prevent toxic emotional negativity of robbing people of the joy of doing their work. If I come to work in the morning, I work for you. I want to come in, I want to work hard, but I want to have fun. I want to feel like I'm working with people where there's a spirit of fellowship, a spirit of teamwork. I want to feel like I'm being honored for who I am and not ridden down for who I'm not. And you allow the negative, the emotional vampires, the pickle suckers, you allow those toxic people to deprive me of that joy. You're not doing a part of your job as a leader, as a manager. If you saw the Harry Potter movies, you remember the characters, the Dementors. And what they do is the Dementor's kiss sucks the life right out of you. And if your organization has Dementors, if you tolerate the people who suck the life out of your spark plug people, you're going to end up being a mediocre organization or, going the way of the dodo bird. And that gets me to the 4th cornerstone of leadership, which is celebration. Often the most overlooked element of leadership. But isn't that what leaders do? They help us celebrate our successes. And they even help us celebrate our good faith failures. Sometimes just having a little party, a celebration of some sort, helps you bring closure. We have finished this. Let's stop and pat ourselves on the back. Congratulate us. Let's have a cake or something. Let's celebrate. Or something didn't work. Have a party. Take the sting out of the failure by celebrating it. And not only does it bring closure, but it sets the stage. Okay, we've closed the door on this. Let's celebrate. Now let's move on. The other thing celebration does is that it creates a greater spirit of fellowship. I've talked earlier about creating a support group environment. And I've never been to a support group ever that doesn't have coffee and cookies or that doesn't in some way add a little bit of celebration to the work at hand. And there's so many little things that you can do. We've just done something at the Values Coach office. I got a little ship captain's bell, put it on the wall, and every time somebody books a speaking engagement, makes a sale, we get an order for books, the person responsible gets to go ring the bell, and we all clap and stand around. It takes a minute or so. It is amazing how a little celebration for that will inspire people. That's what really leadership's all about. It's about setting expectations, about being a positive example, about encouraging people to be their best and work their hardest, and then celebrating the successes and the good faith failures. So let's wrap up our course. We have gone through our 12 core action values. I hope that you have worked hard yourself on being your best self, achieving your authentic goals and dreams. Let me wrap up with something that you will hear if you go to a surgery residency program in a hospital. See one, do one, teach one. We have seen values in action. We have seen a lot of tools for how do you live your values more effectively. Hopefully you've done a lot of it yourself. Hopefully you've taken to heart the Self-Empowerment Pledge, those 7 simple promises. Hopefully you're working on internalizing that pickle promise to stop complaining about what's wrong and appreciating what's right in your life. Hopefully you're using direction deflection questions to shape your attitudes and your behaviors to get yourself out of debt, lose weight, whatever your goals are. Hopefully you have seen these tools and you are now using them. You've seen one, you're doing one, now teach one. Go out and share what you've learned with people in your community, people in your workplace, where your kids go to school, at your church. You have our permission to share anything you've learned in any way that you think will help somebody else, as long as you're not charging for it. You've got our permission to do that. See one, do one, teach one. And then go back and start over at the beginning. That's what Ben Franklin did. He had a list of 12 virtues. He worked on one each month. And by the time he got to December, he decided that he had to go back to the first value, the one that he had started in January, and start all over because he had forgotten it. And every year he went through that cycle. You should too. We've just wrapped up leadership. Now go back and start all over with authenticity. Let me wrap up with my 7 favorite words. And they relate to the values that we've talked about. Never fear. And as I said, it doesn't mean don't be afraid. It means stand up to your fear and do what you're afraid to do. Live your values no matter what. Never quit. And again, it doesn't mean don't stop. It means don't give up. Don't give up on yourself. And if you keep working on these things, it will have a positive effect on you and the results you achieve. Never fear, never quit, and expect a miracle. Not a magic trick. The greatest miracle of all, I believe, is to see yourself becoming the person you're meant to be. To leave behind all the baggage that you've been carrying around. To carve that beautiful statue that is your authentic self. Never fear, never quit, expect a miracle. Now go see one, do one, teach one, and start all over at the beginning. Good luck and God bless and Godspeed to you.